Okay, welcome everybody today. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so our agenda today, as usual, we like to give a little bit of an introduction to stormwater for those of you that are new to the program. And then we'll get into the industrial general permit, which is why we are here today. This training is required. So we will go over all of those general requirements and the background of that permit, as well as direct implementation. We'll go through a bit of the specific BMPs that are required of industrial locations, as well as to get into all the specifics of how to conduct your inspections and monitoring. And then we will have a few updates for you as well, current events in industrial land. So we'll go through your SWIP updates, which are pending right now, as well as some additional notes on what the group has been doing. Okay, so first we'll go through your introduction to stormwater. So the basics here are the differences between the storm drain system and the sewer system, where the sewer system is all your interior drains, and those all go to a treatment center, treatment facility before being discharged out into the ocean offshore. The difference there being that the storm drain system does not go to a treatment system. So anything that the rain picks up on its way down your property and into the street is going to enter directly into the local water bodies. So that's going to be your streams, bays, and eventually the ocean. So because there is no treatment, only clean rainwater is permitted to enter the storm drain system. There are very few exceptions to that. So we're just going to go ahead with the assumption that if it's not clean rainwater, it is not permitted to go into the storm drain system. So the reason that we have these regulations, which the industrial general permit is part of, is just to protect the beneficial uses of all waters of the United States. So to continue using the waters in the ways that we want to, pollutants need to remain below a specific level, excuse me, in order to support those beneficial uses. So some examples of that would be to use a waterway for recreation or as a drinking water source. The bacteria levels need to stay low enough not to make people sick when they come into contact with that water or ingest that water. And to use it as a aquatic species habitat, things like dirt and heavy metals need to stay low enough for species to both survive and continue to thrive in that environment. So some of those beneficial uses are, pretty obvious. So contact or non-contact recreation, so boating, swimming, etc. Municipal, agricultural, and industrial supply. So that is your tap water, and for other uses, you have to have a certain parameters, and they're always going to be testing those in order to be able to use them for those purposes. Habitat, so marine habitat, as well as estuaries. Many of us, drive up and down the coast of San Diego. You can see a lot of those estuarine environments. Also endangered species habitat and other types of wildlife like birds, etc. Migration, that's largely bird populations using those water bodies. Obviously spawning, this is mostly fish and aquatic invertebrates. Navigation, go back. Navigation, so obviously if you're using those waterways to ship goods up and down river, if you're using that water to generate hydropower, commercial and sport fishing, aquaculture, shellfish harvesting, obviously those are a direct link back to human health, wanting to keep those toxins in low levels in those fish that we are consuming. So the types of pollutants that have negative effects on those beneficial uses, and therefore we are working very hard to minimize, include, of course, bacteria, which comes from food waste, decomposing organic waste, and other fecal material, so doggy doos, etc. In addition, organic waste like leaves and grass will decompose and remove oxygen, so they cause some problems downstream. Trash is an easy one to wrap your head around. That's the solid waste component. And then dirt, it will actually bury habitat on cloud water, which kills the aquatic plants at the bottom of that system, and they decompose and remove oxygen and remove habitats. So that's why dirt is an issue. Heavy metals are often attached to dirt or associated with them. Those come from, of course, industrial processes and transportation, road dust, brake dust, engine dust, etc. Oils, of course, easy to spot that rainbow effect. And I think the negative effects are well known with larger oil spills in the past. And then soaps, of course, as well. So those cleaning agents can actually coat fish gills and decrease the oxygen absorption. And so it leads to fish deaths. Okay. So those are kind of the basics of beneficial uses and those pollutants that affect them. So pollutants, the way that this is regulated in California is pollutants associated with the general municipal activities. Those are residential, commercial, and municipal operations. Those are regulated by the municipal general permits, and those are region specific. So we have 9 different regions in California, so that can have some specificity, based on the different environments. Of course, we have a large variety of environments from Northern California to South. So those regions are intended to make sure they're being sensitive to those different needs. Pollutants associated with construction activities, which is, largely sediment based, as their big thing when you're disturbing the ground. Those are regulated by the Construction General Permit, which is a statewide permit. And then pollutants associated with industrial activities are regulated by this Industrial General Permit, which is also statewide. And the reason that you guys are looped in here is because you're doing transportation of those students with maintenance, fueling, or washing. So the transportation activity of itself is not going to be considered industrial, but if you're doing maintenance, fueling, or washing on site, then you are. And that's why you guys are here. Okay, so we'll get quickly into the Industrial General Permit overview. So we'll discuss the industrial based pollutants, we'll go into some smarts tutorials, and discuss compliance risks. Okay, so first of all, industrial pollutants, these are pollutants that have been identified and listed in the Industrial General Permit and are supposed to be addressed by the Industrial General Permit actions. So pH is on there. So that's the acidity or if you're basic or acidic on your scale, that's your pH. This is a requirement for all permittees. Total suspended solids, aka dirt. This is also for all industrial and permittees, as well as oil and grease is all permittees. The other pollutants are ones that have been identified through pollutant source assessments. So that's an assessment of what activities are occurring on your site and what potential pollutants can be coming from that. So right now we have cadmium, which comes from batteries and engine components, copper historically brakes and other engine components, and then zinc, which is anything galvanized. So that includes galvanized tires and other galvanized materials, roofs, fences, etc. You're gonna have a lot of zinc there. And then also diesel for fueling locations only. Notably, this looks a little bit shorter than the list you might be looking at, and that's because this year we've removed a couple of pollutants from your assessment because of the last 10 years of data showing that we are not the school district bus maintenance facilities are not a significant source of those pollutants. So we've eliminated lead and nickel from the heavy metals assessment, and then the MBAS, methylene blue active substances, which is essentially soaps, because we've looked at all of that data and seen that we really are not a significant source of those items. I've also removed gasoline for most of your pollutant assessments because you have been using diesel for the school buses, which is the industrial activity. And if you're only using gasoline for your white fleet, that's not considered an industrial activity. That white fleet is separate from the busing activity. So unless you've told me otherwise, I've removed gasoline from your pollutant list as well. Okay. So the way that we control or minimize pollutants are with best management practices. So these headers here That list is the list of minimum best management practices that are required by the permit. So we've done some modification in your SWIPs, which modify those minimum BMPs and make them applicable to the activities you're doing on site. So your SWIP is the most specific to the BMPs that you should be enacting on your site. But of course, those go through, we'll go through these individually, but you've got good housekeeping, preventative maintenance, spill and leak response, material handling and waste management, erosion and sediment control, employee training. That's why you're here today, and quality assurance and record keeping. Monthly and annual inspections are intended to be a check on those best management practices, making sure that they are implemented correctly and appropriately, and they are effective in removing those pollutants. And then the discharge monitoring is the extra check to make sure that those BMPs are effective in removing the pollutants to the degree that they would be required by the permit. So QSE sampling and observations we'll go through in detail later in the presentation. And then the numeric action levels are that baseline by which we compare all of your analysis levels to make sure you are below those levels where you're going to be supporting those beneficial uses again. Okay. So a quick SMARTS audit. This is the fun part. So if you read these definitions, these are straight from the permit. I do want to make sure every district has at least one LRP. You are permitted to have more than one LRP. So if you have more than one staff person that meets this criteria, they can enter themselves as an LRP. If you just need to have a second person that's able to sign reports and certify, then that would be a duly authorized representative. Make sure that that person is also, their ranking makes sense with this definition. And make sure that we've got at least 2 people in SMARTS with those privileges. Okay, so I wanted to get a little bit into compliance risks. So these are some things that we've been hearing. So I participate in the industrial subcommittee, and that's a statewide, organization. And we have been hearing a lot more about some actual enforcement happening on the industrial permit, not just from your NGOs, your non-governmental organizations bringing suit, but also actually from regional boards enforcing this permit. And mainly what we've been hearing is administrative items. So paperwork and timelines have been actually getting enforced on and levied fines against where there were discrepancies. So I really want to impart to you today that timely certification in SMARTS by either the LRP or DAR is very, very important. So some timelines here is that your QSE ad hoc reports are due within 30 days of receipt from the lab. I know you guys don't know when those lab reports get there, but my summary to you usually arrives in your inbox within a week of having received that. So usually we've got a few weeks for you guys to certify, but I generally just indicate ASAP just to get it done. Your annual reports are always due on July 15th, and your ERA reports, if you guys are entering level 1 or 2, those are always due January 1st. So we generally just try to get those done before Christmas break if possible. If you do have a change of information, which you will very shortly, getting your SWIPs uploaded into SMARTS, and those will be available. Those come up as change of information. So new SWIP or map update or any facility information updates, those all need to go through as a COI. So those do need to be certified by the LRP or DAR. And those are just within 90 days of significant changes, I believe is the metric there. So in summary, action level exceedances and entering level 1 or level 2, I just want to reiterate that that is not non-compliance with the permit. As long as you are accomplishing all of the requirements of the permit. So if you're entering level 1, you're getting your level 1 evaluation and report done, and you're certifying that on time, then you're in compliance with the permit. Having a high, exceedance doesn't mean you're doing, you're not in compliance with the permit. So I did want to stress that. But failure to complete those requirements on time does equal non-compliance. So it is important to get those things certified on time. And I'm going to be like a broken record this year. So might get a lot of spamming from me if you've not certified your reports on time. Okay, so reducing those compliance risks, just making sure you're doing your smarts audit, especially when you have staff changes, making sure you always have a legally responsible person and at least one additional signatory, so either a DAR or a second LRP. Make sure that you have your ID, your password, and your security questions all saved somewhere. So if you call me and ask who your third grade teacher was, I'm not going to know. So to save everybody a headache, please do save those in a safe place. You also need to have your e-signature on file. So that is something that you are supposed to do when you create your account. You send in a hard copy to the state with a wet signature that says that any electronic signature that you include is a legitimate signature. So that needs to be on file before you can certify anything in SMARTS. And then just generally being available and responsive when certification is needed. And that's why I really stress having more than one person that's able to certify in case someone is out on leave. We don't want them to have to certify things on vacation. Okay, so I'm going to get into the specifics now of the industrial general permit implementation. So we'll go through your BMPs, inspections, and then I'll have my colleague Nick go through the monitoring components, and then I'm going to give an additional SMARTS tutorial. Okay. So minimum BMPs, very exciting. This is good housekeeping, which is just keeping everything clean. So if you're looking outdoors, you don't want to think about anything that's going to touch rain, anything that rain is going to flow underneath. All outdoor areas associated with your industrial activities. So anywhere where fueling, washing, or maintenance occurs. I know most of you do primarily all of your maintenance indoors, so that's great. But fueling and washing are those ones that are a little bit tough with those big buses. So make sure that you're checking all of that area. So it's basically your entire drainage area. I do recommend checking your site maps so that you know what the perimeter is of your industrial area. And those are the areas you really want to make sure to keep clean. The other areas, of course, you want to keep clean as well. But for the permit purposes, we're focusing on your industrial activity areas. So you're checking, both the surfaces as well as your conveyance systems. If you have any curb and gutter system or swales or inlets or catch basins, all of those things you want to keep clean, especially prior to your sampling point. Make sure you're checking all your waste handling and disposal areas. So a lot of waste containers can tend to accumulate oils and other debris on the outside of those containers and may periodically need to be cleaned and or replaced to make sure that they're functional. You want to make sure all your dumpsters have lids so the rain is not entering your dumpster and carrying all those pollutants out of the holes in the bottom. They do have holes down there. And if it's possible at all in the future to actually cover your dumpster areas or your waste handling as storage areas as well, that's much better because it takes less effort to make sure no rain gets in there. You don't have to have someone physically closing the lid. So any identified debris, waste, spills, track materials, or leak materials you would want to clean and dispose of appropriately, like as you're checking your good housekeeping BMPs. As you're cleaning, how to best go about that. Vacuum assisted sweeping is best, particularly in your parking lots and areas where you're going to have a lot of brake dust, engine dust, road dust. All of that very, very fine particulate is going to contain a lot of heavy metals. Heavy metals are heavy. They're going to settle into those cracks and crevices and pits of your asphalt and be mobilized when you get a good rainfall flushing them through. So vacuum assisted sweeping is highly recommended because that's going to pull those finer sediments out of the cracks and pits and everywhere that they're hiding. Manual sweeping, of course, behind wheel stops or anywhere else that your vacuum sweeper cannot get. Or if you don't have a vacuum assisted sweeper, of course, manual sweeping is also okay. Leaf blowers, I know this is how a lot of you will clean some areas, at least sometimes when your groundskeepers come through or things like that. But I did want to reiterate that leaf blowers are pretty limited in their benefit, because they do tend to cloud up. You get a lot of dust redistribution across your site. So it's a lot harder to control where that debris is going. And it's often not totally collected, or maybe just kind of blown into the unpaved areas, things like that. And those are not always going to contain all of that debris forever. So the next time it rains, they may also be mobilized. So it's best to get everything into one location and actually physically remove it with your vacuum sweeping or manual sweeping. Sometimes I know you do need to use some amount of water to get up some stains, or otherwise clean something that's a little tougher to clean. So when you do need to do that, just make sure you're containing and collecting all of that wastewater. If it's at all possible to do that cleaning inside of your wash bay or another contained area, if it's like an equipment thing that you need to wash, that's great, you're already done. Otherwise, you can set up downstream from your wash area, a collection area where you're able to then use a shop vac or a broom or something like that to collect all of that wastewater. You can also do some spot cleaning, with a hydrophobic mop or rags, etc. And then steam cleaning, again, it's a little bit like the leaf blowers, where you're more so removing, maybe some oil from a specific spot, but you're redistributing that oil because you're just kind of breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces and redistributing it across your parking lot. So if you do need to stream clean, you do want to continually suck up that water. I know it doesn't produce a whole lot of water, but it's not the best way to remove oil from the site altogether. So since we're talking about wet cleaning, I wanted to segue into illicit discharge prevention. Obviously, we've been discussing, washing in a contained area as possible. But you've got other people on your site. You're not always the only, crew there. So you do want to facilitate the correct activities by, just making sure if there is a need, like if your bus drivers mop out their buses, for instance, then they need somewhere to dispose of that water. And it's very convenient to just dump it out just outside the bus and go down. What's the big deal, right? So making sure that they do have a place to put that, and they have been trained on how to do that. So make sure those mop sinks are accessible. If you need to post signage, because you're getting a lot of non-compliance with that request, that's something else to consider. And then having the appropriate materials to protect those drains. So if you do need to do outdoor cleaning, provide some drain covers to protect those inlets, do training on how to go about those protections. I also recommend restricting access to hoses. So having any hose bibs that are outdoors keyed, so that only people with a key and have therefore in theory been trained on how to prevent discharges would have access to those hoses. And then any other AC lines or condensate lines that might be attached to some of your equipment, just making sure that those are discharging to sewer or to the landscaping without causing erosion. And that way you are preventing that discharge. Sometimes you have vendors on site as well. And this is where we get into a bit of your municipal program as well. But I think all of you, or most of you that are part of the industrial group are also part of the municipal group. So you should have a contact that would be able to tell you if you've got contract language in there for your vendors that are coming on site. There's some standard stormwater language, which is also posted and available on the County Office of Education's website that you can include in those agreements. But obviously something on paper is not as effective as telling someone in person. So if you do see somebody doing the wrong thing, just make sure that you're auditing that activity, occasionally, and making sure that you're redirecting them to what the appropriate treatment would be. And then also, if you see evidence of past discharges, if you see staining around an inlet when you're doing one of your inspections, or you see, a wet spot where it shouldn't be, try to investigate that and see if you can identify the source and eliminate that, that as a flow. It's good also to do some leak audits, so water meter checks, just making sure you're not leaking elsewhere on site. So we only want to have flow to our inlets during a rain event. We don't want to have flow at other times. So there shouldn't be any irrigation water discharging. We already mentioned AC units, fire sprinkler test water, etc. All of those things are prohibited. Okay, so some additional good housekeeping. So minimizing material tracking. So it's important to keep your work bays clean so that the tires or your feet are not tracking oils and other residues outside into the area that would be contacted by stormwater. Try to minimize traffic across unpaved areas. If you do have, an unpaved area of the site that people are driving up onto, try to block that off or stabilize it further, or give them an alternate route so that they don't need to go across those unpaved areas or activity heavy areas where you may have more pollutant deposition. Minimizing dust generation. So in most of your SWIPs, if you're doing brake repair, for instance, we are using the brake cleaner on the brakes to minimize any dust that would be coming off of those brakes during removal or replacement. Any other type of dust generating work should be done indoors or in a contained area. Okay, and then so to eliminate discharges, obviously we've talked about that quite a bit. But also just making sure that your flows are not going through your industrial area. So if there is, something else occurring, try to reroute that that waste flow, that water stream, so that it's not contacting your industrial site. Okay. So we'll go into preventative maintenance. Obviously, this is kind of the core of what you guys are doing at the bus yards is maintenance on the buses. But in addition to the vehicles, you also want to be identifying any other equipment or systems that may pose a threat. They may spill or leak. So in addition to the vehicles, we've got fuel pumps and occasionally hydraulic lifts, wash bays, other sources at your site. Make sure that you are establishing maintenance schedules for all of those different types of equipment and vehicles, to make sure they're in good working order, and you're checking them regularly to make sure that there's no potential for a leak. And then establishing repair procedures. So this is especially important because you have your drivers, I know, doing their pre-drive checks. And so if they do notice that there's an oil spill or antifreeze or any other kind of leak underneath the bus, they are your first line of reporting. So making sure that they understand their assignment there and that they are bringing those concerns right back to you so that those repairs can be made as soon as possible. Okay. Getting into spill and leak response, obviously you want to minimize the spills and leaks. So whenever you can conduct an activity indoors, please go ahead and do so. Where you can't, then you just need to make sure that you are prepared for any potential spills. So stock those spill kit materials. So you've got clay absorbent most often in your work bays, but there are also mats, mops, and other, like the pigs and the booms, different types of equipment. So make sure you know where they are, that they are stocked, and that people who need to use them know how to use them. So I went ahead and made kind of a training list for spill and leak response. So first you're going to be identifying and abating that flow. So if something is actively flowing, you want to make sure that that is shut off or stopped. And then protecting nearby inlets, so covering those with the mats, deploying sandbags or a boom or absorbent mats to prevent the flow from getting into your nearest inlet. Obviously then cleaning up whatever the spill is, absorbents or vacuuming, and repeating and reapplying as needed until all that residue is removed. So this is most often with your oils, where they do kind of penetrate your concrete or your asphalt. They may take more than one go to remove everything. And then properly disposing of spent spill kit materials. So anything more than a trace amount of a hazardous material, you have to dispose of as hazardous material. So just be mindful of that. If you have saturated kitty litter, you should have a waste process for that. And then at the end here, restock that spill kit. So if you actually responded to a spill and use some of those materials, make sure that you are restocking it so it's ready for the next time. Okay. So additional material handling and waste management BMPs. Obviously, you don't want to be doing maintenance or other pollutant exposing activities outdoors during rain events. So wherever possible, obviously there's going to be some emergencies that may happen occasionally and you need to do some type of activity outside. But as much as possible, try to keep those indoors. All industrial materials and waste should be appropriately stored. So that usually means cover and or containment. So maybe one or both. So I've included some pictures of some, scrap bins that are actually covered. They do have a lid that you can put there. Obviously, secondary containment pallets are nice when you have several drums. And a good rule of thumb for liquid containment is it should be able to contain 110% of the largest container therein, or 50% of the total volume of whichever is greater. So that's a good rule of thumb if you're trying to size how much containment that you do need. Keep in mind, most often, as long as your work bay is not sloping directly outside without a floor drain right at the entrance, your building itself can also be considered secondary containment. It is best to keep those larger containers pretty far away from your openings and doors, just to make sure if you do have a spill, it's not likely to exit. All other industrial materials and waste, so used tires, batteries, auto parts, all of those things, generally indoors if you can, otherwise covered and raised off the ground on something like a pallet. You also want to divert run-on away from materials and work areas. So you can do so if you have, for instance, a downspout that's coming into your dumpster or your material enclosure. You can use a downspout extender so that the flow of water is not flushing through that waste storage area. You can also use sandbags if you've got run-on kind of coming from another direction through your industrial space. Okay, and then you do want to observe and clean outdoor containers and equipment, so drums, dumpsters, trash cans, etc. And any equipment that you use for cleaning, etc. So shovels, brooms, drip pans, billy goats, vacuums. If any of those things are stored outdoors, they can get residual pollutants on them as well. Okay. I know most of your sites are largely paved, but sometimes we do see some gravel areas or unpaved areas or, troublesome landscaping. So just want to reiterate that any unpaved areas should be stabilized. You can do so with, vegetation is great. Anything you can do that's more permanent, that doesn't require constant replenishment. I say that because I know we use a lot of fiber rolls and other BMPs like that, but those are generally just supposed to be temporary measures until you get vegetation established or until you get it stabilized in another way. So just keep that in mind. Try to stabilize those areas in more permanent ways. But you can use some of those BMPs as needed in some of those trouble spots as you get things fixed up. And then if you do have site entrances or exits that I think any of you have any that are not paved, but if you do, you would just want to make sure that you lay down gravel or something else to stabilize those high traffic areas. And then if any of your flow from your site is going into like a vegetated area or any other unpaved area, make sure it's not causing erosion of itself. So you should have some riprap if it's entering, say, like a landscaped area, just to dissipate some of that energy from the water and spread it out so that it's not gouging the dirt from that pathway. Okay, and then we've got employee training. Hello, that's why we're here. So all pollution prevention team members need to be trained annually. So if there are any of your team members that are not present, you would want to have them go through this training at a later date. So we'll be providing the recording for posting on the San Diego County Office of Education's website for later viewing, and self-service with the certificates there. They do need to know what their roles and responsibilities are. And if you are in level 1 or level 2, it is required that a QUISP perform your training. So myself and my colleague Nick are both QUISPs. So if they have not gotten their training, they do need to get the training from us or another QUISP. Mechanics should also be trained just because they are the ones doing most of the spill or leak response and responsible for BMPs with housekeeping, material storage, and waste management. So even if they're not somebody doing your monthly inspections or your sampling, they still need to be trained on the aspects of the SWIP that they are responsible for implementing. And then bus drivers as well, we talked about that feedback loop. If they see anything on the bus that's leaking, especially those procedures they need to be trained on. So, spill and leak response, as well as making sure the mechanics are fixing those issues as soon as possible. And since they are the ones doing, at least the bus interior cleaning, as I understand it, and occasional exterior washing as well, they need to be trained on how to contain those activities, make sure they're not just sweeping out the bus into the parking lot, for example. Okay, and the last minimum BMP category is quality assurance and record keeping. So just make sure that you have procedures in place to ensure that the SWIP is properly implemented. This should not all be on one person, so you need to have some backups, people that can take over if someone needs to take a leave of absence. And then make sure you're tracking your BMP implementation with your monthly inspections and retaining those inspection forms, training logs, spill logs, anything related to your industrial permit implementation is required to be kept for 5 years. We do also have a little spot on advanced BMPs. I know some of you have installed advanced BMPs. I see them more often on school sites, but some of your bus yards as well. We've got some structural BMPs. So make sure that if you do have any installation like this, that you are aware of the maintenance needs and performing regular inspections and maintenance on those devices. So there's things like detention basins, vegetated swales or bioswales are fairly common, filter inserts, interceptors, etc. So if I've been on your site, I'm sure I've given you some notes, but these are kind of universal inspection checklists. So for all types of devices, the column on the left gives you some indication of how to move forward with those. And for vegetated ones, specifically, you want to make sure they're well vegetated and that vegetation is appropriate and functional. Okay, and then we get into inspections. So your annual comprehensive site compliance evaluation is performed by your group leader. That would be me. So that's when we come out to see you once a year. Monthly, these are your visual observations that you self-report. And before rain events, this is a recommended self-audit, and this is not a permit requirement. So I've included your form there. So I generally send that out with occasionally with a rain alert, but if you need a pre-rain checklist, let me know. So your monthly visual inspections do have to happen every month when it is not raining, and they need to cover all industrial areas for compliance with those minimum BMPs. So if any issues are noted, just make sure you're reporting the corrections as well. And you can send those forms to myself and to Ashley. Those are our emails. But I did want to kind of preface that coming soon will be an online option. So I know a lot of you function off of your phones and tablets as well in the field, and that's not as conducive even to filling out the Word version or the fillable PDF. So what I've created is an online version, which is the same website, the same software as your certificates. So if you've gone to the jot form link in the chat to get your training certificate, it's the same idea. And I can give you a quick little preview. So yes, this is your certificate of completion. This is the function of that. You enter your information there and submit, and you can get your certificate. But the monthly would be much the same, where you are entering this link. You can start filling it out, and it's a very recognizable form that you guys fill out every month. And once you're completed, you can email it to yourself or download a copy directly. So that will be coming. You should have that probably next week. I just want to make sure everything is functional. And if you are able to use those online forms, that means you would not need to generate an email to myself or to Ashley. You don't need to to scan anything that's been handwritten. You can still go ahead and continue that old framework for now. But yeah, moving forward, if you do that, it will immediately come straight to me, and all of that information will be automatically saved in a spreadsheet as well, so I can more easily let you know if I'm missing anything and make sure we keep you guys on track. So this is your pre-rain event checklist, which you've probably seen. It goes through just the basics of making sure everything is clean, all your good housekeeping is implemented, your storage is secure, and you are ready to take your samples. Okay. So with that, pop quiz, where is your sampling kit? I would like you to physically go and pick up your sampling kit and bring it back. We're going to have a brief intermission so that you can go ahead and do that and use the restroom, get a drink of water, whatever you need to do. We will come back in 5 minutes, so that's 9:50. Mike, you get a gold star. I was gonna say, whoever gets it first gets a gold star from me. But that's the first one I've seen. So yeah, our next portion after intermission is going to cover monitoring. And so this is a good opportunity for you to do a self-audit. Yes, good job. I see you, Carlos. Although it could just be your lunch, it's just a cooler. But yeah, this is a good time to self-audit your kit, make sure you have everything you need and are ready to go. So brief intermission, water break, take a stretch, use the restroom, grab your kits, and we will see you at 9:50. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It is 9:50. We want to go ahead and get started again. All right. Who has their kits? I want to see them. Or you can raise your hand, or you can nod to yourself as well. Beautiful. I like it. Okay. Great. So, Ashley, did you want to introduce Nick? Nick's going to be taking over this monitoring section.
Yes, great. Thank you. So next we have Nick LaPaglia with DMAX, and he is a qualified industrial stormwater practitioner with 5 years of stormwater experience focused on stormwater compliance inspection and monitoring programs. He coordinates annual dry and wet weather monitoring programs and source identification studies for numerous municipalities and assists several industrial clients with monthly inspections, sampling, annual training, and other compliance tasks. So thank you so much for being with us today, Nick.
Hello, yeah, no problem. So yeah, we're gonna go over some monitoring things. So maybe Annika, a quick break in this long presentation, but yeah, so ultimately Annika's talking about, preventative things to make sure the stormwater stays clean. And I'm here to talk about kind of that final step, taking the sample and doing all the things appropriate to help get the best results possible here. So first slide here, we're gonna talk about training staff and sampling, identifying things. So all y'all already pulled out your bottle kits. Awesome. Super important that, we have, just like Annika was talking about, duly authorized representatives, legally responsible persons, having multiple people understand where the sampling kit is and all that fun stuff is going to be important because weather comes, unexpectedly quickly. Someone might be out on leave and whatnot. So always having a backup, important. So anyway, getting to the slides. The couple important things, again, talking about weather here, weather reports, watching the weather frequently, talking generally in the office is always a good thing. If you're not specifically the person in charge of watching weather, just bringing it up casually always helps out. Putting things on people's radar, making sure we're all prepared for what's up and coming. So watching the weather, making sure you know when it's coming, chain of custody forms and your visual observation forms. So the things you'll need after kind of collecting your samples, making sure you can observe the site and take notes. Also knowing your site, seems like all y'all have a very good familiarity, but training new people on the site as well. Everyone has different monitoring locations. Every site is different. Some people have, one monitoring inlet. Some people have 2, 3. You might have multiple inlets on the site, but only one is actually a monitoring location. So all those logistics are important for training new people and making sure that the existing staff do understand that as well. The bottle kits are another important part of the things we're going to be needing to take our samples, right? The new bottle kits are what we're going to be going with. It's going to be important to use the new ones. The older kits, in a pinch, we can use those bottles if needed. But specifically the ones with preservatives, some of them say that they have acid and whatnot in them. Those kits, the recommendation is to only keep those, use those within a year time span. So in an absolute pinch, we use those things and, make an argument one way or another. But the new bottle kits that were provided to you should be what we're going with this year as our main sampling device. The other things here on this list, the pH paper, an important part of, again, your sampling, something that gets done in the field, not necessarily something you submit to the lab. Your gloves, your cooler, your ice, gloves, making sure that hands stay clean. Basically what we're doing is testing for things that may or may not be in the water, right? So there may be pollutants and contaminants. So you want to keep yourself safe, and also making sure that, when we're touching bottles and stuff like that, staying as clean as possible to not contaminate those things as well. Making sure that caps stay on until we pour water in, caps go right back on after we pour water in, keep your fingers out of the bottles, all that fun stuff. Yeah, so I think we can move on to the next slide. So identifying when sampling is appropriate. So there's a few different things about we're sampling, or actually in the list here. So qualified storm events are what we're sampling. Qualified storm event preceded by 48 hours of dry, so no runoff. It could be, a light sprinkle the day before or something like that. But essentially, we're looking for no runoff reaching any of the inlets on site for 48 hours is what we're calling dry. We must take samples of 2 QSEs per year at all industrial discharge points. So as applicable, again, if it doesn't rain the entire year, you guys are fine. Going back to the importance of record keeping and tracking and that kind of stuff as well. If there is a storm that happens outside of business hours, not something we specifically have to sample at times, right? So keeping track and keeping record of the storms that occur, whether you do or do not sample them, is going to be good for in case of audits and people kind of poking into things, right? So the other component here is the timeline. So once between July and December and once between January and June. So the permit cycle is split into 2 kind of sections here. Again, as described, July to December, and then at the turn of the year from January to June. And lastly, as mentioned briefly, the sampling is required during working hours when conditions are safe, right? So in your guys' SWIPs, you should be outlining operation hours at your sites. They may differ, they may all be the same, but again, refer to your SWIP for the operating hours. And when conditions are safe is definitely an important part as well. If we have hurricanes, lightning, all the crazy fun things, tornado, who knows, whatever's happening the next year, right? We, are only sampling if it's safe. There's justification for, if any of the crazy things are happening and you can't go out and take a sample, again, keep record, note what's happening, but safety is paramount. So be sure that everything is safe before going out and sampling. So for monitoring, collecting the sample gets a little bit more tricky again. So we have to have that qualifying storm event like we were talking about, 48 hours, no runoff, and sampling happening, or participation discharges happening during business hours, right? So there is a time window that's associated with this, essentially trying to avoid a case of where, you take a sample a long time after the storm starts, your things have been washed off, run off, it's trying to prevent that. So we have this 4-hour rule essentially is what the permit outlines. So if runoff begins during operating hours, you must take the sample within 4 hours of that discharge starting. So starts, discharging at 8 a.m., you have till noon to take your sample essentially. The best case, again, kind of referring briefly to what I was talking about, is taking the sample as late into the event as possible. If it's, a for sure rain event for the whole day, 4 hours, starts at 8 a.m., it's going to go till 8 p.m. is what the forecast is calling for. Collecting toward the end of that 4-hour window is definitely the most optimal, but you definitely have to also weigh, San Diego, we kind of flashy storms, things happen. The storm doesn't always pan out as predicted. So you got to weigh that a little bit. If it looks like it may or may not rain toward the end of that period, taking a cautious sample when you can collect the sample is a good thing. But again, you have that 4-hour window to work with from if rain starts during business hours, you have 4 hours from that discharge start time to take the sample. Getting a little bit more complicated here. So if rain starts before your business hours, so if your rain starts within 12 hours of the start of business hours, so if rain started at say 7 p.m. and your business hours start at 6 a.m., it's within that 12-hour window. It's raining all the way from 7 p.m. through 6 a.m. into the middle of the day, the following day, right? You'd be taking that sample within 4 hours of the start of business hours. So this is that little bit extended window. If this situation happens, it's usually going to be pretty favorable for results or whatnot. But, again, keeping an eye out for that rain that happens before business hours. It's also one of those things where it could rain at 7 p.m. like my previous example, and then stop from, 8 p.m. all the way to the start of business hours and then start again. Because that rain did occur within that 12-hour period. If it starts raining again during business hours, you would still have to sample within that 4-hour window of start business hours. So yeah, I think that covers this slide. As far as this stuff goes, yeah, just make sure you're watching the weather. These tracking, weather tracking and rain accumulation links that we have here are going to be helpful to figure out when rain starts, not I don't imagine anyone lives on site in these places, right? So it's a little bit difficult to tell if something happened in the middle of the night, right? So, if you have a rain gauge on site, perfect, it's easy enough. Your closest weather gauge on these weather tracking services is what we're gonna lean on probably pretty hard. And overall, previously mentioned on the slide above, about 0.1 inches is kind of the mark for discharge at a paved site. So watching these weather tracking links and all this data around your guys' area, trying to make an informed decision on whether or not you think a discharge occurred at your site. Again, having that on-site experience, knowing historically, about how much rain equals a discharge, that will come into play, but 0.1 inches is usually our approximate benchmark for that stuff. So when you're monitoring, you should be observing the flow at every sampling point, right? So taking your sample in ideally some sort of clear container, looking for floating particulate or discolored kind of ideas, any sort of sheen going on. We should be making those observations, recording them on the form. And if there are any, weird things kind of going on, we should be doing at the same time an upstream kind of quick investigation to look for sources of those things. So if we see a sheen, maybe there's some sort of oil on the ground or something, discoloration of, brown, maybe there's a bunch of sediment, right? So just looking for the sources, making notes where applicable, and then taking action based on the results you get back as well. Seeing something is not necessarily going to indicate your results are going to be poor, one thing or another, but having the visual observation on the day of gives you something to reference when you get the results back. You can kind of point at one thing or another, implement additional BMPs, so on. All right, so measuring the pH. So the pH is the one test you guys run in the field when collecting the sample. The rest get, we'll talk about the procedure later, but the rest of the samples get sent to a lab to be analyzed. The pH, I believe most of y'all are using pH paper as described here. pH paper it's obviously a visual thing, right? So there's a little bit of bias one way or another potentially, right? So what this is saying here is, the action level set in the permit are 6 and 9, right? So if you are taking your pH strip, you should be taking it and immediately comparing to the colored sheet that is provided with it. If you get a result that is less than 6 or more than 9, definitely repeat the pH test to confirm the result. It's one of those things where we want to feel confident in the data that we're submitting, right? If you get one kind of result and it's a little bit weird, it's fine to take others and get a confirmation on that. If you see one that says pH 5.5 and you take two more that say it's 6.5, probably going to go with 6.5, right? It seems like we have more things indicating that we're, in that pH range. Maybe the first one was some kind of fluke, or maybe something was, wrong with the pH strip itself, right? So anyway, we want to feel confident in the results that we're reporting, because this stuff ultimately can come back, and a pH exceedance is still an exceedance, and we would still have to do all the same like level 1 kind of investigations and figuring out where it's coming from and so, right? So the stuff that we're doing, we want to feel confident in the field. So retaking a pH sample is definitely on the table to report what you believe the pH actually is. Noting here on the bottom, low pH is below 7, 1 to 7, 0 to 7, I guess. And essentially things that would create low pH are acidic, right? So batteries, open trash containers, chemicals. Also, if you have maybe like a lime tree or something and whatnot, the drainage area, something like that, right? So low pH things are acidic. High pH basic things, often white powders kind of create that basic environment. So drywall dust, concrete dust, that kind of stuff is going to create a higher pH from 7 up, 8 up, more or less. So collecting the samples themselves, again, as I mentioned before, wearing gloves is important for not only your safety, but the sample integrity as well. We want to fill bottles directly if possible. Not always going to be the case. It's going to be a little bit difficult for some sites to fill the bottles without any sort of intermediate container. Perfect world is, have a little cascade down through the inlet. You're collecting the sample after any BMPs that are in the inlet or in the upstream area. But again, it's often difficult. Sometimes you'll need a glass bottle is the preference, some sort of glass to collect in the interim. Any sort of clean kind of containers, what we're looking for as well. Again, glass is ideal. Not a lot of things stick to glass or interact with it as much as plastic. But if you need like a plastic bag or something because your sheet flow is super close to the surface and it's hard to get a sample, that's on the table as well. The main thing about collecting samples with these intermediate containers is you want to do your very best to not disturb anything. You know, you're using this container, but the ideal situation is you're letting the water flow into this thing. You're not scooping up the ground and getting dirt and other things involved. You know, a lot of the metals that we're talking about as far as what we're testing for attached to dirt. We are also testing for total suspended solids, which is essentially dirt in its own right. So things that we are churning up and actively suspending are gonna, you know, create poor results. So we want to make sure that the intermediate container is clean and that the way we're collecting the sample is as I want to say non-invasive, but does not disturb any area or minimizes that kind of disruption. Same kind of goes for before you go sampling. Walking through the drainage area is not ideal. Driving through the drainage area, anywhere where that water will then flow to where you're collecting the sample, try and minimize staying or try and stay out of that area. We want to minimize any upstream disruptions. So for filling the bottles themselves, again, the intermediate container, we can use it if applicable. Best case is to fill it straight in the bottles. Filling the bottles to the neck. For the plastic bottles and the, I guess I should step back 1 second. So filling the bottles to the neck is the main way that we're going to be filling these. The neck is that kind of where the bottle starts to shape up, where the lid spins on. Some of the bottles, the brown ones, we're going to be filling to the top and trying to minimize air with the septum. The important thing about the bottles that we're going to fill close to the top, even the ones to the neck, some of the bottles do have acids in them. And if we overfill, it's not ideal because we don't want to pour out that sample, especially into the drain or whatnot. So do your best to fill the bottle carefully such that we don't overfill them, lose acid. The acid is actually at a specific volume as well relative to the volume of the bottle. So if we're dumping out acid, the sample preservation is a little bit more questionable. So anyway, do your best to fill the bottles carefully, fill them to the neck, most of them to the neck, and then the little brown ones that some of y'all got as well should be filled a little bit further toward the lid. Making sure that we are labeling all of the bottles is definitely important, especially if you have more than one sampling location. Best case is to label them before you go out and sample, take a couple quick observations, make sure you feel confident you are going to be able to take a sample, fill out the bottles ahead of time under, you know, protected under your car or whatever in a building somewhere that's dry. Because once those labels get wet, it's not impossible to label them, but it makes it much, much harder. So labeling everything with the discharge ID, the date, the time, all of that is going to be important for record keeping, tracking purposes. And the same information will also end up on your chain of custody form following that sample collection. And lastly, the bottles being placed on ice is very important. The sample should be cooled as soon as possible to temperature varies, but it's somewhere around 6 degrees for most stuff. So they need to be pretty cold. The plan for this year, we'll talk about a little bit more, but the samples will be provided to us at DMAX, and then we will ship out the samples. So keeping them cold that entire time is important, not just when they get into our hands in our office. They will go into a fridge for us, but if you provide them to us on ice, ideal situation. So sample vials, carefully filled to the brim. For the bottles that, again, the little brown amber bottle should be filled with virtually no air. The rest of the bottle should be filled to the neck. You can check as far as the air goes. If you turn the bottle upside down, there should be a very small bubble that comes up to the bottom. But yeah, again, for the most of the bottles that will be filled to the neck, that's less applicable. All right, so store samples, I mentioned that briefly. We're going to have a little bit different of a procedure this year. So we're going to get into that a little bit in the next couple slides mentioned here. So previous years, I believe the case was that these samples are manually dropped off to Enviromatrix. They were just taken over there within a day or so of collecting the samples, same day in some cases if you're close enough, right? The new procedure that we're using is having each location provide us, DMAX, with the samples. So sending us an email heads up of your plan to sample is going to be important. Just general communication is kind of the big thing here. We, DMAX, will likely be aware that there is rain coming. We have our own kind of responsibilities and whatnot to deal with when rain was coming, but it's a big county. You guys are all over the place. So there's potential where someone might get rain up in, Valley Center or something, and it's bone dry down here in like Serrano Valley area. So, keeping us in the loop, let us know when you are seeing weather. Planning to sample more so is the important part. And then we'll make sure that we are staffed and ready to accept your samples the following day or same day. We'll figure out the best time at that point. So how do I fill out a chain of custody? Another important part of things, right? So again, as Annika mentioned, there's a little bit more scrutiny over kind of the small logistics of things. The chain of custody is another one of those things that we want to do our best to keep the chain alive, right? So what this is, it's literally, as it says, a chain of custody of the samples themselves, right? So the information at the top is very important. The person who collected the sample, the district name specific to where you're collecting it, the discharge point identifier, sample date, time, like we put on our bottles, and then noting how many bottles you have as well for the tracking purposes. If you say you have 5 bottles, I look at your chain of custody when you provide it to me and you only have 4, we got to figure out what the problem is. Maybe it's noted incorrectly, which is fine, or maybe we're missing a bottle, which is another thing that we'll deal with at the time, right? So this is important for keeping track of all the little details. And let me go back for 1 second. The most important part about the chain is having at the bottom, this bottom portion about your info, date, time, samples, changed hands. We should be making sure that anytime the sample changes hands from different people, that we should be signing it off and making note of that. So person A collects the sample, puts it in the fridge. Person B takes the sample to DMAX. That interaction there between A and B, person A should sign the COC, relinquishing it to person B. Person B then signs, says they accept it. They get to our office. I, person C in this situation, will sign again saying B, hands it to C, and so on, right? So anytime the sample changes hands, we should be signing the COC saying this person had it, then this person had it, and so on. So the delivery kind of plan we have going on here is taking the sample and providing it to us, DMAX, within 24 hours of collecting the sample. We have a little bit of wiggle room with the hold times, but the biggest thing here is we have to ship the sample to LA. We're going to courier it actually to make sure it all gets there in time and at appropriate temperatures, because you never know with FedEx. But what the main point of that is within 24 hours gives us enough room to get it to the lab and have them analyze it in within the hold time. Gets a little bit trickier when we start having samples collected on maybe like a Friday or something like that. So we'll coordinate a little bit more at the time when we were emailing about sample collection and whatnot. But the goal here is to get us those samples within 24 hours of collection, whether that's same day or the next morning or something like that. Either is pretty much fine. So the results we'll get back, likely DMAX, us will be getting the results, and we'll have the opportunity to analyze them and let you guys know about any exceedances we see or whatnot as well. Maybe everything looks great and we let you know that as well. So we'll get the results, analyze them, and certify the report in Smarts ASAP. Again, as Annika mentioned, there's more scrutiny over the timeline of those things. So getting that done as quick as possible is going to be our goal for this year. And as far as results and whatnot, we can then assess if there is any exceedances, whether or not we want to take any action, or whether or not there is any action we can take to minimize the pollutants or do some sort of other assessment to look for the pollutants if they're still unknown as far as source goes.
All right, thank you, Nick. Does anybody have any questions on monitoring at the moment? Okay, I'm going to move on. We only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. But I wanted to give you a quick little Smarts tutorial because they have updated at least their homepage, and a few of the options have moved. So I just wanted to really quickly give you a quick shot of that. So mainly where you're going to be accessing is the document ready for certification, which is in the upper right corner now. Once you get onto the other pages, they do have the same tabs, and there is the drop-down menu from the top right. But where previously they had the menu on the left, now everything is kind of their own box. So, so a quick tutorial, the things I'd like you guys to be able to do every year is your annual audit, where you're going to start at the main menu and go to active applications. So from this first page here, you'll see active applications is the second light blue box. So going there, making sure you click on your WDID and update any info. I do notice that in these tabs, I do often see staff members that are no longer with the district. So make sure that you're auditing that at least annually, and that you are checking your documents ready for certification to ensure nothing is left pending. I know I will ping you if something is outstanding, but make sure that you're checking that at least collectively once a year. Make sure that there's nothing outstanding. The things that you need to certify are all underneath that documents ready for certification tab. So you have your ad hoc reports, you have your annual reports, and you have your COIs. So your SWIPs will be updated next week. So just keep an eye out for those emails from me with instructions to certify, but those do need to be certified a little bit differently than the reports. Under your reports, make sure you're reviewing data summary and attachments to make sure that the lab reports are there and all the information matches the letter that you received from us. Notes will have any special circumstances. So if we had a bottle broken or a missing report or something like that, that's where we'll put those special notes, and then certify that if everything is in order. And you should get a confirmation email. If you do not get a confirmation email, you may not have actually certified. So make sure that you're checking your email for that. Same deal with annual reports, except the part that you review is under questions, and that's all entered by DMAX. And then I do need your monthly forms to answer one of those questions accurately. So make sure that you're sending all those monthly forms. Again, if we do move to the online forms and you're using that, those come directly to me and you won't need to send me anything. And then again with the COIs, but this time what you want to review is the attachments if I'm attaching an updated SWIP or sitemap to that. Okay, and then real quick updates. Again, I made those changes to your SWIPs, so you'll be seeing those coming into your inbox very shortly with instructions for certification. It will have all the new lab and drop-off protocols and the changed chain of custodies. All of those things will be revamped for this year. Just in time for the wet season to start. So, so those will be going through. And again, my annual plug for encouragement of no exposure, reduction in costs can be seen if you can keep your initial upfront costs under control, but a little bit of more of a long-term compliance assurance. So that's always a good situation if you can get any of those activities solely indoors or within cover and containment. So I've seen a lot more berming and connections to sewer and cover in order to meet that experience. I did also want to mention that it looks like we're going to have an El Nino, which sounds like it's going to be pretty strong, which generally means more rain. So more rain can have some pros. So definitely more qualifying events mean more opportunities for sampling, more room for error in case something untoward happened or we broke a bottle or something like that. It can also help to reduce your annual average. And it may mean a cleaner slate, may have some better results if you've got a lot of wash off. But if it's very high intensity, you may also have poorer samples if you're getting a lot of erosion, because those high intensity storms can cause flooding, getting water from other places where you weren't before. So make sure you're shoring up your existing BMPs and any protections that you have in place. Keep sandbags handy and have additional staff trained to sample just in case your staff need to respond to something more high priority like flooding of a classroom or something like that. Okay, thank you all so much for hanging out with us this morning. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact either myself or Nick. And again, I'm sending in the chat the jot form a link to get your training certification. Make sure you use that link and save your certificate. But at the same time, I am also getting that in a spreadsheet form, so I know who you are. if you're watching this this presentation at a later date, then you'll need to enter that web link into your browser to receive your certificate. Okay, well, thank you everyone, and I look forward to another great reporting year. And if you are returning from municipal, we'll be back in 10 minutes.